you force them to, they will. And this is really the beauty of what Walmart has done. Walmart has driven their market to buy exclusively on price. Their value proposition is probably one of the best ones in the world. It's very direct, it's very simple, very consistent, easy to remember. So they are forcing their customers to buy on price. They're not trying to convince you that they're selling quality or service or anything else. It's bam, we're selling you price. So an example, which I like, toilet paper. A pretty mundane product. This is another one. It really has but two uses. Cleaning yourself or decorating your neighbor's trees. And it sits in one of the most competitive places for selling anything there is, a grocery store shelf. Extremely difficult to get grocery store space. So the last time I looked, there were 23 different kinds of toilet paper on the shelf at Safeway. And that excludes all the different configurations of number of rolls in a pack. These are just different kinds of toilet paper. 23. So what do you think the percentage price differential is from the single ply per square foot? So we've normalized it to square foot. And the double ply. What do you think the percentage price difference is between the cheapest and the most expensive?
I'd say it's about 25%.
Okay, anybody else?
I'd say 100%.
I'd say 100.
100? Okay. It's 1,000% last night at Safeway. I went and checked it because I hadn't done it in a while. It was 1,000%. The cheapest one is 57 cents per 100 square feet. The most expensive one is $5.87 per 100 square feet. 1,000%. You know that the most expensive one is selling because if it wasn't, it would be off the shelf because the store would not give it shelf space. That's what I love about the toilet paper example, is grocery stores are harsh about taking things off the shelf that don't sell. 1,000%. That means somebody is able to differentiate something as mundane as toilet paper to get people to pay 1,000% more than what they could pay if they bought the cheapest one. Interestingly enough, the last time I had looked at this, about 4 years ago, it was only 600%. Apple. Anybody know for a Mac computer or a PC-based computer, we'll talk desktops, for similar technical capacity, what the price difference is between a PC computer and then a Mac computer?
Almost double. Probably
Almost more than
triple.
Yeah, if you're dealing with desktops, yeah.
It's 60% higher. 60% higher, and yet nobody selling PC-based computers could make any money. Apple did. Smartphones. Bazillion smartphones. As of the full year of 2012, Apple had 8% of the smartphone market. Do you know how much of the profit they made? For the smartphone business? They made 80% of the profits. Why? Because they know how to price, and they know how to value price, and they know how to determine what the value is that people will pay for. I'm going to talk about the local example a little in depth a little later, but I bought a towing company a whole bunch of years ago here in Flagstaff. And the first thing that we did when we entered in, and I'll talk more about why and how we justified it, was we raised the price by 30% when we walked in the door for towing. Pretty mundane. There's a million companies running around here doing towing. And two things happened. One was that our profit went way up. You know what the other one was? Our sales volume went way up. So if you raise price, I'm not sure what I was going to say about this particular slide, actually, other than to say that if you look at raising price 10%, you'll notice that that $50,000 drops immediately directly to the bottom line. If in fact you increase sales, you don't get the same effect. When you increase sales, you increase cost of goods. You may or may not increase your fixed operating costs, but you'll certainly increase your variable costs. So there's always a subtraction from that 50,000. You generate 50,000 more sales, there are costs associated with that sales, and so you don't get the same drop-down effect. So you want to put money on the bottom line, make sure you're pricing right. If I'm more expensive than my competitors, my customers won't buy. Okay, so you go to the state fair at Coconino Fairgrounds in September, whenever it is, and you see these two lemonade stands. It's a brother and a sister competing with each other. The brother's selling lemonade for 25 cents. The sister's selling it for 50 cents. Clearly the sister's smarter. Which one do you buy as you're walking into the fair and you see both of them standing there? Anybody?
Well, I go for the 25% because I'm not perceiving a value difference between the two.
Okay.
I'm gonna go to whatever's more convenient, because I don't care about the 25 cents.
So, yeah, so
Both
if there's a
lines.
line.
Exactly. That's a key point. If there's a line, you at the 25 cent, you may be willing to pay additional 25 cents to not have to wait in the line. So now let's change one thing on one of the booths. So now it's the difference between lemonade for 25 cents, lemonade for 50 cents, but they've spelled out clean water for their lemonade. It's not to say that he's not using clean water also, but he's just making a statement that we're using clean water. Now what do you buy? Exactly. So the reason I put this up here is because one of the experiences I've had is oftentimes creating additional value for your product or service requires you to do nothing other than change the way you talk about what you're doing. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to add features to your product or create some big whiz-bang new campaign or change anything about what you're doing, just by repositioning how you talk about it. And we'll talk about that later because that is value proposition. Anybody know what the difference between an $8,000 Rolex and a $40 Seiko is? Somebody's probably seen this before.
Price.
Okay, yeah, there's obviously a big difference. Right? So the answer I get a lot is, and excuse me, I got an extra zero there, but is that it's $7,960. The difference between a Rolex and a Seiko watch is that the Seiko is more accurate.
Right.
But Rolex doesn't sell watches. They're not competing with Seiko. So they don't really care that the Seiko is more accurate. Rolex is selling something totally different. They've differentiated themselves not on their ability to tell time or anything of that sort. They differentiated themselves much the way that Apple differentiates its products, about status, cool, whatever it might be. It's not about what it does. People don't have Apple computers necessarily because of what it does. A lot of it is about the aura that came with Apple for many years. Please, by the way, if you disagree or have a question, please feel free to interrupt me at any time. One of the other things that also happens is people think that, okay, if I add more features, then I can raise the price. But adding things is not necessary. Just because you add it doesn't mean it adds value.
Todd, is that your awesome car?
It is. It is. I've upgraded the generator though.
That's awesome.
So it's another thing when we think, oftentimes people associate the things associated with the product as what drives the price they can demand for it. It's not the things, it's what value does that deliver to the customer if you add it on. So going back to that list of things that I've done and my experience in pricing everything from diagnostic devices and implantable medical devices to towing services, to laboratory services, to selling companies. What factors are not important in price? First one, obviously, supply and demand. That doesn't matter at all. Second is competition. And the third is cost of goods, or your costs of doing business. Completely unimportant in setting your price. As we'll talk about a little later, it has an important role after you've set your price in evaluating your business, but it's totally irrelevant to the value you're delivering. Your cost of goods has no relevance to determining the value of the product, what the value is that your product or service delivers to the customer. So it plays no role in establishing price. The only thing that's really important in establishing the price of your product is value. And not just the real value, but also the perceived value. And going back to the Apple example, really a lot of what's caught up in that differential in price is perceived value. There is some real value there too. You know, they don't crash and you don't get viruses and things like that. But there's also a tremendous amount of perceived value built into that. And so the most important thing in increasing your perceived value, there's three things actually. First one is differentiate. You have to differentiate your product. And you have to, on an ongoing basis, continue to differentiate your product because people catch up to you. And then you have to differentiate again and raise your price again. When people catch up to you, and then you differentiate again and raise your price again. The second one is differentiate. And I'll give you three guesses to the third one. Differentiate. That is ultimately the driver of price and value perception. So when it comes right down to it, the most important thing in establishing pricing and the most important factor in pricing is your value proposition. What is it you're telling customers you're going to deliver to them? So if you think back to any Apple, for example, commercial you ever saw for a computer or anything else, did you ever hear them talk about megabytes, gigabytes, all of these details that everybody else, Compaq, HP, is talking about in selling their computers? No, they did these goofy commercials with a guy making fun of the Microsoft guy, and they were creating a perception and a feeling and an identity. They never sold their computers based on the actual technical capabilities of the computer, because that wasn't what they were selling. So there's a few different methodologies for pricing that I see used. One is value-based pricing. The other is cost-plus pricing. And the third is market-based pricing. So the most commonly used one that I see is cost-plus pricing. And everybody knows why.
It's easy.
Exactly. There's nothing easier than cost-plus pricing. You decide how much you want to make on top of your costs, you figure out what your costs are, and you add it on. And market-based pricing is also pretty common, and a lot of times there's a bit of combination of this. They use the market to decide what the plus is. But ultimately, it's a pretty simple way to establish pricing. People don't like to do value-based pricing because it's hard. It's hard to figure out what is the value of the service or the product that I'm delivering to the market. It's especially hard, for example, you were talking about pricing consulting services. I have worked as a consultant also. Establishing a value for your service is extremely difficult. And convincing others of the value of that service is even harder yet. So, what is value-based pricing? A lot of people misinterpret what value-based pricing is. I was very fortunate in that I worked for Gore, as I think I had up there earlier, for many years, 11 or 12 years. And the first year I worked there, I was fortunate enough to run into Bill Gore, who started Gore, in the offices back in Maryland where I was working then. Just serendipitously, he was standing in the hall for some reason when I was. And he is kind of a guru of value pricing, and I had a pricing discussion with him, and that was really the beginning of the compilation of what I'd experienced before that and everything I've experienced since then. But value pricing is often misunderstood, and people think of it as, oh, it's as much as you can get out of the market. It is gouging. It's the highest possible price you can get. Or is it just below the competitors? Or, but that's not what it's about at all. Value-based pricing is about the value the product or service delivers to the customer. That's why it's so hard, because it's hard to figure that out. But the thing that was beautiful to me when I was talking to Bill Gore and he was telling me kind of where he was coming from on value pricing was cost plus means that you take your total costs, you add on whatever the margin is you want, and that equals the price. So me as the customer, if you do a lousy job in your company of controlling costs, I pay for that. That hardly seems fair. Why should I have to pay for your ineptness? Market-based, plus or minus the competitor's pricing, depending on where you want to be in the market. Why would you want to compare yourself to your competitors unless you don't think you're any better? And if you don't think you're any better, why aren't you doing something to make yourself better than your competitors? Add some value, reposition what you're actually doing. The thing I love about value-based pricing, when it's truly value-based, is what can be more fair to both the producer and the customer than the customer pays for the value that the product or service delivers to them. That sounds pretty fair. The manufacturer or service provider is paid for the value that they deliver to the customer. Well, geez, that sounds pretty fair too. So to me, the beauty of value-based pricing is not that it's high pricing or low pricing, it's fair pricing to both the person receiving the good or service and to the person who's supplying the good or service. It is fair pricing, is the way I look at value-based pricing when it's really done right. Anybody have any questions or comments about that? So why is this critical? Well, going back to the title, because pricing is so critical to your profit, cash flow, all of the things that, and especially cash flow, that typically determine whether you survive or not when you start a business. And it doesn't matter whether you're a small business or a huge business. Why did GM fail? Well, because basically they were trying to make up on volume something they're selling for $200, a $200 loss on every car they sold. So guess what? When you try and make that up on volume, every time you sell one, you lose more money. But big companies also, they couldn't provide value at, their value didn't correspond to a price that was high enough to allow them to be in business, and we'll talk some more about that here in a minute. But it's absolutely a critical thing, and it's, again, something that a lot of businesses that I've been in and also worked with don't pay anywhere near as much attention to as they should. They focus a lot more on generating revenue and selling more, even though they may not be making any money on what they're selling. And for me, as a person who's always worked in for-profit businesses, for me, the measure of a for-profit business is profit. I'm really not interested in huge revenue growth if it comes with no profit. That doesn't do me any good. It's profit. That's what we run businesses for. So what's the best way to maximize profit? I think Apple has proved this. You know, they own 8% of the smartphone market, or they did at the end of 2012, but they owned 80% of the profits. Wow, that's genius. That's what I want. I don't need to control market share. And they get beat up on Wall Street all the time because people say, well, they're losing market share. Yes, but they're maintaining profits. They're still making more money than anybody else who has a much bigger part of the market share. Why do we care about market share? I mean, it does give some indication of where a business is going, but it's not what the target is. It's not what the goal is. The goal is not high volume, it's high profit. And you get high profit through high margin. So as I said at the beginning, I don't want to talk about theory. I want to talk about what my experience has been going into businesses that were not very profitable or had very low margins, and without really changing dramatically products or services or the company itself, changing to a high margin and growing business model. So I'm going to go through B2C, B2B, and B2G. And this will be, I don't know if any of you are involved in businesses where you're responding to bids from the government, but it's also possible to use the high margin, high value model when you're selling to the government as well. And I'm not talking about $8,000 hammers, but real things. So B2C, as I mentioned earlier, I owned a towing company for a bunch of years, and when we bought the business, it was, to say the least, not very profitable at all. And as we went through the process of buying it, I was kind of looking for, well, how the heck do we make this more profitable once we actually buy it? And you know, how much can you do different in towing? You go out, you pick up the car, you take it where they want it to go, and you drop it off without breaking it. And you know, that's kind of what the towing business is. And so I went out onto, there's these towing boards, comment boards on the web, and looked at that, and I listened to what people said who had been towed. I'd only been towed once, personally. But the thing I kept hearing was time. Time it took for the truck to get there. Time it took for the truck to get there. Time it took for the truck to get there. And that was a recurring theme over and over and over again. And so when we actually closed on the business, it may not have been the first day, but it was within the first week, we raised our prices 30%. And we put a big sign up in the office which said 30 minutes. If you're in town, we'll be to you within 30 minutes. Period. And so we get a lot of people who would call up, and it is a very competitive business. People would call up, say, well, here I am, I need to go here. How much will it be? We tell them the price. We were probably 30%, or we were already more expensive than most of the other companies in town. And so we were somewhere between 30 and 40% higher price than anybody else in town. And so a lot of times people would say, oh, well, so-and-so said they would do it for this. And we would say, okay, well, if that's what you want to do, give them a call and have them come out. And so they wouldn't ask us to come get them, and presumably they called the other company and asked them to come. And so then about an hour and 15 minutes later, we get a call back from them. And they'd say, can you still get here in 30 minutes? Yeah, we'll be there in 30 minutes, guaranteed. And we would go out and we would do the work. Well, so what we saw happening was that while everybody in the towing business was thinking that it was all about price, it's not about price. It wasn't about price. It was how quickly can you get there. And that was particularly true. We did a lot of big truck and motorhome towing. And that was particularly true of people who are on vacation in the summer who break down out on the res at night in their motorhome with their family. They're really not very patient. And 10 minutes feels like an hour when your kids are screaming in the back of your motorhome and you're on the side of the road. So what we basically found was that, one, we immediately became dramatically more profitable than when we bought the business. But the thing that was really fascinating to me is the degree to which our volume also went up. Because we were differentiated. And the word got around that we were differentiated. And so we just saw, along with an increase in revenue, from the increase in price, we also saw an increase in volume of work that we did. Because people appreciated that we got there quickly, particularly the motor clubs. Because when you call in for a tow through a motor club, if you're sitting on the side of the road and you're tired of waiting and you want to know where the car, you call the motor club back. The motor club hates that because it takes up their time and occupies their resources. So they want you to get out there and get this done. So we started also driving more traffic from the motor clubs because they knew we would get out there quickly and we would get it done. We were charging them higher prices than other companies in town, but we got the work done. It was less work for them. So my point is, highly competitive business. We didn't change anything about how we run. We didn't buy more trucks or do anything. All we did was changed our messaging and said 30 minutes in town. B2B. I have a couple of examples there, but I'll stick to towing because I've already given the backdrop. So we also did lots of big truck towing, so semi-trucks, other medium-sized trucks, and highly competitive. Obviously, the trucking companies are looking for a low-cost provider. A little harder to differentiate. Time is still important, especially if they have a load that has a scheduled time of delivery. But another way you can go about selling at higher prices is to change the pricing model. So in the trucking industry, they were used to paying towing companies for coming out, hooking up your truck to their semi, and the mileage you drove with the truck in tow. So we decided to do two things. We changed the pricing scheme in that we started charging mileage both directions. Well, what did that do? Well, it lowered the cost of the return miles because we were spreading out our costs over both ways. And so when people saw our mileage cost, it looked lower, perceived value. It was actually higher. But the other thing that we did that was actually the most powerful, anybody familiar here with capitation? In medicine and dentistry, basically an an insurance company will tell say a business or whatever, that we will cover all of your employees for this fixed amount per month, regardless of how sick or how well they are. We're going to charge you every month this amount, every month. And it doesn't matter what costs get incurred, you only pay us this fixed amount. Was really common in the dental maintenance organizations, like a HMO, but a DMO, back in the 80s and 90s. So given I had just come out of the dental industry, I said, you know what? I'm going to capitate towing. And so we went out and started talking to trucking companies and said, you know what? Between the Arizona state borders, east and west on I-40, we will cover all of your towing for this fixed amount per month. How do you get your head around that? I mean, they had no idea what to do with that. They'd never heard of it, seen it, whatever. And we actually didn't get many people to, actually only one company ever signed up for the capitation. But what we did was we changed the discussion. And so we were in a different space talking to them about what we did as opposed to just competing directly. So sometimes the way that you can, again, create a different value discussion is by changing the model, doing something totally different from how that particular market currently functions. Business to government. The bidding process is always a challenging one, no matter what business you're in. And I joined a company that was in a market that they themselves and pretty much everybody in that market thought was commoditized. So, and it's all government bids. And so everybody in that market was just completely cutthroat. And so the margins that was being, of that business was just absolutely minuscule. And so I joined that company, and given my bent is about high margin business, said about how do we convert this to a high margin business. And so this request for proposal came in, and first of all, we really couldn't meet the requirements of the proposal. There was an IT piece of it that we couldn't meet. So the first thing we did was we needed to add value to our service that we didn't have. So I went out and we contracted with a company to provide that service if we won the bid. And then we packaged it together, and we actually totally changed the discussion. This was in the probation area and in drug testing. And the discussion there was around results, positive, negative. But probation is about behavior change. And so what I started looking at is, okay, so what is the science behind behavior change? What drives behavior change? And how do we fit ourselves into that so that we come at them with the concept of, we're going to help you support your behavior change efforts. We're not sending you drug test results. We're sending you information to help you change behavior. So we packaged this all up, and we bid it pretty high. And the people in the company said, no way, we're going to win that. And so we bid it. So I don't remember the time frame. It comes back to us. We're one of 2 finalists. You're not the lowest. Okay, this is our best and final. Everybody know what a best and final is? They come back to you, they want you to come back to them. So what do you do when they ask for a best and final?
Typically cut the price a little bit.
You cut the price, right? Especially when you know you're not the low provider. So what did we do? We raised it by 5%. Because by that point, I'd had a number of conversations with them. And I knew actually we were providing more value to them than I thought we were when we bid originally. So I'm sure the other company came back and gave a best and final and lowered their price. I can't imagine they didn't. But we raised ours 5% per test, and we won the business at very high margins in a competitive bid. But the reason we did is because everybody else was providing test results. We were providing a much bigger value, and so we got money for that. I'll give you one other example around B2 government, which will go back to the towing business. We had the city towing contract in Flagstaff when I bought the company. We were getting paid $23.33 per call. The prior owners had bid that. I couldn't understand why, because if you started the truck, you'd already spent $23.33 at least. So it came around the next time, and we bid it, knowing that somebody was going to underbid us. And it was a request for bid. So under RFB, the government's required by law to go with the lowest bidder, as opposed to a request for proposal where they can evaluate based on value delivered. So we bid at a level we knew we would lose, and we were prepared to lose it because we were losing money by running it, as it was, and we did, so we lost it. So it was a 3-year contract. So after year 2, I started working on the next time the bid came out. The first thing we did was we worked with the city around why they wanted to convert it from a request for bid to a request for proposal. And we were successful in doing that. Basically around safety for police officers, because actually most traffic deaths occur in secondary accidents, not in the primary accident. And the longer a vehicles involved in the accident are on the road, the more likely it is that you're going to have secondary accidents. So these were our arguments that we made, and that they were restricting themselves in terms of selecting the best provider to protect police officers by doing a request for bid. So they switched it to a request for proposal. And then we went about on, wrote a long document looking at similar types of towns around the country and what towing rates were there and a variety of factors, and we provided that to them. So the request for proposal came out, and we bid on it. We bid on it at 5 times what the price was when we had it the last time. We weren't the lowest bidder, but we provided the highest value, and we won the contract at very high margins. So my point to all of these stories is that, one, based on all my experience, and regardless of who you're selling to, there's ways to, if you focus on differentiation, to differentiate your product, whether you're selling through a bid process, whether you're selling to businesses, whether you're selling to consumers. But it's all about value proposition and differentiation. If you do it well, you can charge truly what the value is that you're providing. I'm not telling you should gouge people or charge more, but you should charge for the value you're delivering, and you should expect to receive compensation for the value that you deliver to your customers. So any questions about any of that?
Todd, if I may ask then, so you're essentially saying that you convert the bid process to a consultative sale, because what you're doing is you're going in and you're trying to change the terms or change the evaluation, change the expectation on the
Right,
part.
we're trying to influence
Yeah.
the bid document when it comes to
Yeah.
out, the request for proposal. And we did that in a variety of ways. One, working to get it converted from a request for bid to a request for proposal, but also changing the expectation levels that the city had about the level of service. So this is something I said once, which is floating out around on the web somewhere, but because it was in response to somebody who said, value drives margin, but price drives the close. And so I responded, no. Value drives margin, and value drives the close. It's not price. Price merely follows value, and that's how you maximize margin, by maximizing value and pricing accordingly. So it's one thing to set the price, it's another thing to sell it. And this was one of the challenges at the company I was talking about, relative to drug testing. We really had to convert all the salespeople and the business itself from thinking of itself as being commodity price-driven business to a value-driven business. And they've been a price-based business for many years, and so it's not necessarily an easy conversion to make. The most important thing is, when you decide what the value is, you better really believe it. You can't kind of say, well, this is kind of the value we provide, and as soon as somebody challenges you on it, kind of shrink away from it. You have to really believe, have confidence, belief, and passion that this is what we're bringing to you. This is the value we're bringing to you. You need to be able to say, the price is bam. Not the price is $8. The price is, and be confident that, you know what, I've given them a great deal. That the price is fair, as we talked about before. And that you would be doing your client a severe disservice if you did not convince them to buy your product or service. That's the first step of selling value. You really have to believe that you're delivering that value. So let me talk a little bit about how you go about actually establishing what the value of your product or service is. Kind of amazing, nobody said I'm full of it yet. A lot of people talk about market research. Not big on market research. If you want to create a new box for Kellogg's for the Rice Krispies, that's who makes Rice Krispies, right?
Yes.
Do some incremental type of improvement, market research may have value. If you're looking at being innovative, bringing high value to the market, market research, in my opinion, is of zero value. And the reason for that is that all of us respond based on how we filtered whatever we heard. Okay. So now we take you back to 1998. And someone from Apple Computer comes to you and says, what would you like to see us do? What could we provide to you? What would you really like to see us do? Well, that goes into you, and immediately your brain says, computers, because that's what Apple was. They were a computer company. So would you have thought to say, you know what would be really great is if you could make something about the size of a cigarette box that could hold 1,000 songs, run for days and days and days without recharging. And I could bounce it around and the music never skips or does anything like that. No, you're not going to say it because you've already filtered. Or if Microsoft comes to you and says, you know, what can we do? Microsoft may have some capacity like making vodka that you know nothing about. And so you're going to filter every question in that market research based on your perception of who's talking to you or your perception about what issues are. And so for me, it's all about observation. So one of the things that I noticed when I was, before we'd actually closed on the business and I was in the towing company, is that the dispatchers, all they ever did was answer the question, how much longer? How much longer? How much longer? Most of the calls were not calls to actually initiate a tow. It was to answer the question, how much longer, how much longer, how much longer? So by observing that, that was an important piece for me of this whole thing around the 30 minutes. I might have asked the people at AMPM, which is the towing company I own, what's the most critical factor in your business that we'll need to deal with? I'd be willing to bet $1,000 that it never would have been getting to the customer faster or making a guarantee about getting to the customer faster. Observe your customer dealing with whatever their issue is today that you believe you're going to have the solution for. Also, once you provide them with the solution, keep observing. I was amazed at the number of things when I was at Gore selling vascular grafts and implantable surgical devices. The number of innovations and improvements on products that came from salespeople observing in the operating room what was going on. That if you'd asked the surgeon, what would you like to see improved? He never would have said it. Never. It was just part of the deal of doing that type of surgery and using that type of product. But it was actually turned out things that we could improve on. But you only get that by observing. You have to figure out how you can differentiate in whatever that space is. After you see what your customers' issues are, what capacities do you have, or what capacities can you go outside and get? You don't necessarily need to have them, as I was describing before, with the laboratory testing. It's not something necessarily you need to do yourself, at least to start. And we kind of did it that way because we wanted to make sure we were actually right before we invested in doing some big IT project. So there's a lot of way to bring in value to what you're doing and add it in, and maybe later you'll decide, yeah, this warrants us doing it ourselves. But you don't necessarily have to start there. Develop your value proposition. You can't do this unless you've done these two things, because these two things are what creates your value proposition. What is it we're going to deliver to our customer, whether it's a product or a service? There's a book I'm currently reading called Nail It, Then Scale It. Anybody seen it? It's really not anything revolutionary, but they've kind of pulled a whole lot of stuff from a whole lot of different places together. And one of the things they talk about in there is that entrepreneurs tend to want to build their product, and we often believe that we know exactly what the market wants, and so they go all the way through development before they go out and they test it. And this is all about kind of the startup weekend model, where you make a prototype, or you take the idea out, you take a prototype out and you test it. Well, the same thing with your value proposition. You need to test the value proposition and make sure it resonates. And then you value price. What's that really worth to the customer? How are they benefiting by the fact that you're delivering that value? Is it saving them money in some way relative to other competitors or substituters that might be available to them? But you need to price it based on the value you're delivering to the end user. I'll give you a story that was tremendously impactful to me when I was selling in the dental field. Losing your teeth is highly debilitating in many different ways for patients who lose their teeth. And I was we were working with a doctor in Wyomissing, Pennsylvania, and we had developed a new product for regenerating bone in the oral cavity that would allow people who couldn't have implants because they didn't have enough bone left to get dental implants. And so an elderly woman, older woman, she was probably in her 70s, was enrolled in the study. She had no bone. She was way outside the protocol for the clinical study, but he entered her anyways. He did the procedure, got spectacular results, put the implants in, they were surrounded by bones, they were stable, and so they did all the restoration. And when the lady got out of the chair, I was there at her final visit, and she just danced and came over and gave me a kiss. That's value. the bone, the product, all the other stuff that had happened, that's just stuff. The value is what happened at the end. And so those are the things, you have to price that. You can't price the piece of material that we supply to the doctor to make that happen. You gotta price the way that woman felt at the end. That's the value. Okay, we finally get to cost. Now you have to go and say, okay, at that value price, what are my costs to deliver this? Can I make money at that price? So your costs are a check, not a driver. Value is the driver, but at some point you have to look, can I actually be in this business and make money? And so that's where cost comes in. Now you look and say, okay, these are my product costs, these are my sales and marketing costs, these are my administrative costs. When I factor all that in, is there still margin there for me to make money? And I saw things at Gore where we went through the value pricing product and the reality was, no, couldn't. And so those projects got killed. Not because it wasn't a great product, but because it didn't have a high enough value for what the costs were to deliver to the market to make it a viable business. But that's on the backside. That's not the upfront, oh, these are my costs, so this must mean this is what my price is. It's the backside check of whether you actually have a viable business or not. Iterate. You can't price once. As one of the guy who was the head of the medical products sales force when I first joined Gore back in the 80s used to say, his saying was, start high and raise. And that was his pricing philosophy. But as we were talking about before, things change. One of the things that we saw in the time business was what happened after a year. All the other companies said, well, who were doing market-based pricing said, well, hey, they're priced here. So we need to raise our prices. So we made a 30% jump when we came in, and then we saw over the next year. So then what did we do? We jumped again. Then we changed our format for pricing to be different from everybody else. So it's not a single one-time thing that you price your product and you're done. The market changes. Presumably you may make changes in your product or service to add more value. This is a process that just keeps, or you observe something while watching somebody use your product or service that says, oh wow, if I pitch this in a slightly different way, I'm going to be delivering more value than what I've really priced in now. So you keep iterating, keep iterating. So this is just another take on the lemonade stand. Hopefully I don't offend anybody. But it's just another way of the perspective that, you know, how do you differentiate and how do you add perceived value? And this is one of my favorite quotes for selling value, which is, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Your job is to make the horse thirsty. I think that is the last slide. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody might have or any things that you might challenge about what I said. Yeah.
Can you share any strategies? A lot of this makes sense to me intuitively after hearing you say it, but can you say any strategies for communicating a future price increase to existing customers to minimize a negative reaction from them?
Absolutely. And, you know, I've done a lot of price increases over my my career, and one of the things that I always advise people is do price increases often. When you have a customer, if you're in a business where you tend to have long-term customers who buy over and over, and they get used to the fact that you haven't raised your price in 5 years, and then you hit them with a significant price increase, those are much harder to deal with. So first of all, you should raise price. On an annual basis, you should look at your pricing and consider where you're at. Have you added value in the past year? Have you subtracted value in the past year? I mean, where do you stand? But do it on a regular basis. Don't get in a trap where you're trying to do a 50% price raise because you haven't done one in 11 years. Because those are hard for people to swallow. Because they also have to adjust on their end. The second is never associate it with cost. The only time I've ever associated one with cost was, again, in the towing business when fuel prices went absolutely berserk. I can't remember, it was right after 9/11, and fuel prices just went absolutely berserk. And so rather than having a price increase, what we did was a fuel surcharge that we charged for a period of time, and then we did away with it. So that's really the only time that I've associated a cost with any type of a pricing thing. And so I always try and associate it with some value. It may not be the value of the product itself, but with some service, that additional service that you've added, or some surrounding value that you're delivering that wasn't associated with the product before. People have an expectation that prices go up. And this is one of the things that I think business people forget. I mean, when you go to the grocery store, you understand that when you go next year, the prices on most things are going to be higher. But yet as business people, we get stuck in this trap that, my customers are going to go crazy if I raise prices, they're going to go to my competitor or whatever. The general understanding we all have, all consumers have, is over time prices go up. And so when you send out a price increase, it's not necessarily a big surprise to anybody. It's actually, they're probably more surprised if you haven't raised prices in 5 years, and they're wondering, what the heck's going on there. So often, at least look at it every year, but then always try and tie it to some additional value that you're bringing to the customer. Yeah.
I was thinking, I get the impression you would not be a fan of having loss leaders in a portfolio of services. That the idea of having something that is intentionally not priced per value, but priced as a low margin commodity does not improve your entire portfolio.
Actually, I'm not totally opposed to that. I think they have a place. I've used them in businesses that had very cyclical sales, or especially unpredictable cycles, in order to manage cash flow. And so in order to make sure I had a continuous cash flow, I may be willing in certain circumstances to do a lower margin, or loss leader, as you put it, in order to make sure I have cash flow consistently during the period when my other high margin business is much more unpredictable. But no, I think those things, there's all kinds of different tools. This is more of a general outline of a philosophy of pricing, but there's a lot of different other tools that you can use within that where it makes sense for your overall business. Anything else? Very good. Well, I hope it was helpful, and appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you.